Hey everybody, this is David, and I'm excited because today we are going to be talking about some SQL statements, specifically the select statement, the where statement, and we'll talk a bit about the different comparison operators that you can use with the where statement, and then we'll also talk about stacking conditions using and or. So let's go ahead and let's get started, and we can begin learning about these different SQL statements. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to sign into Google BigQuery. And if you don't use Google BigQuery, if you have some other query engine, that's fine. I'm signed into BigQuery here, and we're going to be looking at a data set that's available through the BigQuery public data. If you don't know how to get into Google BigQuery, or you don't know how to get to a query engine at all, you can see my earlier video about Intro to BigQuery, where I talk through everything you need to know in order to get set up in Google Cloud so that you can run queries. But I'm going to assume that you've already done all that. So let's now take a look, and I want to talk a bit about the data set that I'm going to be using for today's lesson. So the data set that I'm going to look at is this one right here, this Austin 311 service requests. And if we take a look, I'm going to point you to some of the columns, and we'll talk about what's in each of these columns, because this will be important later for how we query this data set. So we have our unique key column, which is our primary key for this data set. Our primary key, that just means that every single row has a different value for our unique key. I think this is probably the complaint number for each of these different 311 service requests. And so this column can be used to identify each unique individual complaint, which is in a single row. And then we have like our complaint description, our complaint source, our complaint status, and then we have a number of dates related to our complaint, and then a whole bunch of other stuff we're not going to worry about. So let's go ahead and get started with querying this table. I'm going to hide our list of data sets. I'm going to move this over to the right so we can keep a preview of our data itself there. And let's go ahead and open up a new query window. So the first thing that I want to talk about today is I want to talk about the select statement, which is probably the most important statement in SQL. It needs to be in every single query that you run. So I'm going to begin my query with select, and we'll start with a select star. A select star statement selects every column and every row in the table that you're querying. So I have select star, and the next piece I'm going to need is I need to pick, well, where is my data coming from? So I have my from statement here, and then I copied and pasted my table ID, and I put it inside these talk marks. This is just the key that's to the left of the one key, so that turns this green. It allows me to open this resource. If I were to lose it, I can just control click and reopen my table on the right hand side here. So anyway, I've got my select star statement, and this is going to select every column and every row from my data set, and it's going to process 400 megabytes, which, as we know, if you saw my earlier video about BigQuery and BigQuery pricing, 400 megabytes is nothing. This is going to cost us like a fraction of a penny. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to press Control Enter to run my query, and we are going to get some results. And it's thinking. And here are our results. So we get every row and every column in our data set. And some of these are even populated. They're not populated in the preview, probably because we're looking at different rows. And you can see that we get like 1.6 million rows in this data set. So select star is great if we want to get the whole table, but it's not really useful for doing any kind of data analysis, because if we're going to do some kind of analysis, we need to filter our data. We need to narrow down to a specific subset of our rows and columns in order to really understand what's going on in the data, and so that it can be useful for decision making. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at narrowing down to only specific columns. So one way you can do this is with the except statement. So if I run select star except source, what that's going to do is that's going to give me every column here except the source column. This will take just a second to run, and we'll see our result here. If we want to select, and you see here, unique key, complaint, description, status, our source column has disappeared. If you want to select only specific columns, which I think is what we're going to want to do here, you can type in the names of those columns. So we have our unique key, we'll have our complaint description. Oh, and perfect. BigQuery is giving me some autocomplete, so I don't have to type everything out. We want our status. We are going to want our source column, and then let's just have our created date as well. So we can type in here now a list of our columns that we want to select. So we can go ahead and we'll run that query. And this is only now going to give us our select, only the columns we've selected. So we just have our, these 5 columns, data from these 5 columns. Of course, we still have every row in our query. There's another feature that goes along with select. It's another keyword that's really useful here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually come down and create another query, and I'll show you that specific keyword. So that keyword is distinct. And what we'll do actually is we'll do a select, Control Z. We're going to do a select distinct on just the source column. And what that's going to do is that is going to show us only the unique values for the source column. So we have select, distinct, source, from, and then this is our table. And what I can do here is I can highlight this query, and it gives me, okay, this query is only going to process 14 megabytes. Even though there are 2 queries written in our query window, the one that's highlighted is the one that will run if you have it highlighted. So I'm going to go ahead and run this query. And this query is now going to give me, you can see our results are only 19 rows. We only have 19 rows here because we have just the distinct, just the unique values for the source column. So these are all the different possible sources that you could have for a complaint: email, phone, mobile, etc., etc., etc. All right, so we've talked now about the select statement. We've talked about select except. We've talked about the star. We've talked about listing out columns. We've talked about distinct. Let's move on to doing something a little more interesting, and we'll get into our where keyword, our where SQL keyword. So we've got select, all our columns, from. Now let's add the where keyword. And what I want to do here is I'm going to say select my columns from this table where, and then I have to give it a condition. So my condition is going to be where my source is equal to phone. I want all of my complaints, it's going to give me all the rows, but only when the source is the phone, where somebody called in their complaint. Let's run this query and let's see what we get. All right. So if we go over here to our table details, we can see that the table has 1.6 million rows, but we only get 1.2 million rows back when we run the query with this filter, where the source is the phone. Okay, so that's obviously like 1.2 million out of the 1.6 million. The majority of these appear to be people who were calling in over the phone. But you can see that we have now lost some of the rows from the data set. Some of the rows have been dropped from our results. So we've now dropped, of course, some columns. We're only selecting these 5, and we're only selecting the rows where the source is the phone number. The next thing that we want to do is we can start to put some conditions together, and we can do also some comparison operators. So we have our equals operator, but we can make things a lot more interesting here. So what if I want all of these complaints that came in through the phone and source equals email? And I'm just going to line these up so it's simple to read. Let's run that, and we're going to get only the rows where we have our source's phone and our source's email. Well, of course, you can't have a complaint coming in on the phone and on the email. A complaint can only come in from one place. So our AND operator is not going to work here, but we could do OR. So where we have a source is either the phone or it comes in through the email. Let's run that. And this should give us now more rows than we had when we were just looking at the phone. All right, fantastic. So we have, it's like 1 million. Oops, I've lost my data set. Let's open that back up again. I've got like, 1.2 million, but it was more rows than we had just with phone. So what we can do is we can chain together multiple conditions. So we have source equals phone or source equals email. Let's do another operator here. We've been using this equal sign. You can also use some of the other operators that you would have in math, like lesser than or greater than or lesser than or equal to or greater than or equal to. So I have here where the source is phone or the source is email. And let's do an and. The created date is greater than, let's just do 2020-0101. So it has to be more recent than January 1st, 2020. And if we want to do complaints that happen on January 1st, 2020, we'll do a greater than or equal to, right? If we do just a greater than, it's January 2nd and everything after that. If we do greater than or equal to, we have January 1st including. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so we take a look over here. Now, something I want us to notice, what the heck is going on? I thought we were only going to get rows where our created date was after January 1st, 2020, or was on or after January 1st, 2020. But we have this row here with the created date in 2017. Here's something really important that you need to know about how and or statements work in SQL. And statements are evaluated first. Then or statements are evaluated. So what we're going to get here, we don't have any parentheses to force an order of operations. So what happens is it basically says, all right, we're going to find anywhere where the source is on the phone, and then it executes these two together first, or where the created date is after this and it's an email. So right now we're getting phone records, we're getting email records, but the email records are only when it's after this date. You'll notice that this one here is a phone record, and the phone record is before this created date. So what we have to do is we have to wrap our statement in parentheses. So we're going to take a parentheses here where our source equals phone or our source equals email. We want that to execute together, right? We're going to start with just getting all the phone records and all the email records, right? Email or phone, if it fits either condition, it's going to end up in our data set. Then we have our and statement. And, all right, once we've got just the email records and the phone records, then only records where the created date is at least January 1st, 2020. So let's run that again. And we'll get our results back here. And now this time, we can just glance at the data, but I promise you, we don't have any records from before January 1st, 2020. And all the records are only email or phone. All right. So we've talked about the select statement. We've talked about the where statement, which allows us to filter our data. We've talked about conditions, like using an equal sign to select a specific condition to say basically where we have a source equals like a certain type, like a phone or an email. And we've talked about using and or. And we've also discussed the importance of using parentheses in order to force an order of operations. And always executes first. And so anytime we have an or statement, we usually want parentheses around what we've created to make sure that it's treated as a single unit. All right, I think that's enough for now. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.